They said he was a monster. They said he had ice in his veins and blood on his hands. When I stepped off that stagecoach in Blackwood Creek, I wasn't looking for love. I was running for my life. I saw him there, Aidan Ketchum, chained inside a rusted iron cage in the center of town, like a wild animal waiting for the butcher. Every man in the territory feared him. Every woman looked away in disgust. But I didn't look away. I walked right up to those iron bars, looked the devil in the eye, and whispered 3 words that would change history. "Please, marry me." I thought I was saving myself. I had no idea I was unleashing a storm that would burn this town to the ground. October 14th, 1874. Blackwood Creek, Montana Territory. The mud in Blackwood Creek was not the honest, earthy mud of a farm. It was black, sticky, and smelled of horse manure and unwashed men. Amelia Ann Miller lifted the hem of her travel-stained grey dress, but the grime had already claimed the lace. She stood on the wooden boardwalk, her grip tightening on the handle of her solitary carpet bag until her knuckles turned white. She had travelled 2,000 miles from Philadelphia on a lie. "I'm looking for Mr. Tobias Finch," Amelia said, her voice trembling slightly as she addressed the man leaning against the post of the general store. He was chewing on a splinter of wood, his eyes hidden beneath the brim of a grease-stained hat. The man stopped chewing. He looked her up and down, lingering on the fragility of her frame. "Finch," he grunted. "The dry goods clerk?" "Yes, he sent for me. I am his intended." The man let out a sharp, wheezing laugh that turned into a cough. He spat a stream of tobacco juice into the street, narrowly missing a passing dog. "Well, ma'am, unless you intend to marry a pine box, you're about 3 days too late. Finch took a fever on Tuesday. We buried him Thursday." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Amelia felt the blood drain from her face. Tobias Finch was her safety net. He was the boring, safe, kindly older man she had agreed to marry by correspondence, solely to escape the debts her late husband had left behind in the East. The loan sharks in Philadelphia weren't just looking for money anymore. They were looking for blood. "Dead?" she whispered. "Deader than a hammer," the man confirmed. "Left nothing but a tab at the saloon and a leaky roof." Amelia stepped back, her back hitting the rough wood of the storefront. She had $4 in her purse, no return ticket, no family, and now no fiancé. She was a woman alone in a territory where the ratio of men to women was 50-1, and 49 of them were looking for trouble. Just then, a commotion erupted down the main thoroughfare. The thick, wet sound of horses trudging through mud mixed with the clatter of heavy chains. "Get back!" someone shouted. "Make way for the beast!" Amelia turned, clutching her bag to her chest. A wagon was rolling into town, pulled by 4 heavy draft horses frothing at the mouth. But it wasn't the horses that drew the crowd's terrified gaze. It was what sat on the flat bed of the wagon. It was a cage, constructed of thick iron bars, rusted and reinforced with oak beams. It looked strong enough to hold a grizzly bear. Inside, huddled in the corner but staring out with eyes that burned like coals, was a man. He was massive. Even seated, his shoulders were broad enough to span a doorway. His hair was a matted mane of dark brown, hanging over a face obscured by a thick, untamed beard. He wore nothing but tattered trousers, his chest crisscrossed with old scars and fresh welts. Heavy shackles bound his wrists and ankles, bolted to the floor of the cage. "Who is that?" Amelia asked, her voice barely audible over the jeers of the crowd. The man beside her took off his hat, a rare sign of nervous respect. "That there is Aidan Ketchum. They call him the Bear of Bitterroot." "What did he do?" "What didn't he?" The man lowered his voice. "Sheriff Paddock says Ketchum slaughtered a prospecting team up on the ridge. Says he's a savage. They dragged him down from the mountain 3 days ago. Sheriff's keeping him in the square until the circuit judge arrives to hang him." Amelia watched as the wagon halted in front of the sheriff's office. The prisoner, Aidan, didn't flinch as a rotten tomato sailed through the air and splattered against the bars, inches from his face. He didn't roar, he didn't scream. He just watched them. His eyes scanned the crowd, cold and detached, until they landed on Amelia. For a heartbeat, the noise of the town fell away. Amelia felt a jolt of electricity zip up her spine. His eyes weren't wild, she realized. They were intelligent, and they were incredibly, devastatingly sad. "Move along, folks," a voice boomed. Sheriff Josiah Paddock stepped out of his office. He was a sleek man, too clean for a frontier town, with a silver star polished to a mirror shine, and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "The animal is secure. Justice will be done come Monday." The crowd cheered, but Amelia felt a cold knot in her stomach. She looked at the sheriff, then back at the man in the cage. That night, Amelia sat in the corner of the boarding house dining room, nursing a cup of weak tea. She listened to the gossip. "Ketchum's got a deed," a woman whispered at the next table. "A full section of land up near the timberline. Rich soil. Gold in the creek, they say." "Fat lot of good it does him now," her companion replied. "Once he hangs, that land reverts to the territory, or to whoever is next of kin." "He ain't got no kin. He's a mountain man. Lived alone for 10 years. Then the sheriff will auction it, and we all know who'll buy it for a penny." Amelia's mind began to race. She looked out the window. The town square was dark, save for a single lantern hanging off the corner of the cage. The sheriff had left a deputy on guard, but the deputy was currently slumped in a chair, snoring with a bottle of whiskey in his lap. She touched the empty space on her finger, where a wedding ring should be. She had no money. She had no protection. If the collectors from Philadelphia found her here, she would be dragged back to a debtor's prison, or worse. She needed a name. She needed a shield. She looked at the man in the cage. He was going to die on Monday. He had nothing to lose. Amelia stood up. She smoothed her dress, took a deep breath, and walked out into the freezing mud. The wind howled through the slats of the iron cage, biting at Aidan Ketchum's exposed skin. He didn't feel it. He had long ago learned to turn off the pain. He sat perfectly still, listening to the drunken snores of Deputy Cletus. Aidan knew he was going to hang. It didn't matter that he hadn't killed those prospectors. It didn't matter that Sheriff Paddock had planted the stolen watches in his cabin. Paddock wanted the timber on his land, and Paddock was the law. In the West, the truth was whatever the man with the gun said it was. He heard the squelch of boots in the mud, light, hesitant steps, not a man's heavy tread. Aidan didn't move his head, but his eyes shifted. A woman. The same woman from the boardwalk, small, pale, looking like a gust of wind would blow her back to the city. She was shivering, wrapping a thin shawl around her shoulders. She stopped 3 feet from the bars. The smell of lavender and fear drifted toward him, cutting through the stench of the cage. "You should go, lady," Aidan rasped. His voice sounded like grinding gravel. He hadn't used it in days, unless you brought a rock to throw. Amelia jumped at the sound but didn't retreat. She glanced at the sleeping deputy, then stepped closer, her hands gripping the cold iron bars. "I didn't bring a rock," she whispered. "I brought a proposition." Aidan turned his head slowly. In the dim lantern light, his face was a map of shadows. "I'm a dead man walking. I ain't got nothing to trade." "You have a name," she said, "and you have land." Aidan let out a dark chuckle. "Land that Paddock is going to steal the minute my neck snaps. Not if you have a widow." The silence that followed was heavier than the chains on his wrists. Aidan shifted, the metal clanking softly. He leaned forward, his face coming into the light. The scar running down his left cheek twitched. "What did you say?" "If you die without an heir, the state takes it," Amelia said, her voice gaining a desperate strength. "I asked the boarding house owner about the territorial laws. If you are married, your property goes to your wife." There was a pile of kindling next to it. She picked up a piece of wood with 2 fingers, dropped it in, and then looked for a match. She struck one against the box. It snapped. She struck another. It flared and went out. Caleb watched, saying nothing. On the 5th try, she got a fire going, though she used enough kindling to burn the place down. Then came the potatoes. She found a knife, but she held it like a quill pen. She started peeling a potato, gouging out huge chunks of white flesh, wasting half of it. "Stop!" Caleb barked. She dropped the knife, the clatter loud in the silence. The knife is dull." Caleb stood up. He walked over to her, his shadow engulfing her. He took the knife from her hand. It was razor sharp. He'd honed it that morning. He picked up a potato and peeled it in one long, continuous ribbon, the skin falling away paper thin. He slammed the knife into the cutting board. "The knife ain't dull," he said, his voice low and dangerous. The thought of Josiah Paddock getting his hands on the cabin, on the stream where Aidan had found peace, it made his blood boil. "If I marry you," Aidan said slowly, "you get the land. Paddock gets nothing." "Exactly. And what do I get?" Amelia hesitated. She reached into a pocket and pulled out a small, silver pocket knife. It was tiny, barely a tool, but she slipped it through the bars. "You get a chance," she whispered. "It's not a key, but the hinge on the floorboard. It's rusted." Aidan looked at the small knife in the mud of the cage floor. Then he looked at her. "What's your name, girl?" "Amelia. Amelia Ann Miller." "Well, Amelia Ann Miller," Aidan grunted, covering the knife with his bare foot. "You better go wake the preacher. Looks like we're having a wedding." Amelia nodded, breathless. I have to get the sheriff's permission. He has to allow it." "He will," Aidan said, a grim smile appearing in his beard. "Tell him I've got a stash of gold buried on the property. Tell him I won't say where it is unless I get to marry you. Tell him you'll get the location out of me before I hang." Amelia's eyes widened. "Do you? Have gold?" Aidan leaned back into the shadows. "Go." Amelia turned and ran toward the sheriff's office. Aidan watched her go. He slid the knife between his toes, feeling the cold steel. He didn't have gold. He had lead and gunpowder waiting in his cabin. If this crazy woman gave him a chance to get back there, Paddock was going to pay. Underscore, 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 underscore. 20 minutes later, Sheriff Josiah Paddock sat behind his desk, his boots up on the wood. He stared at Amelia with amusement. "You want to marry the beast?" Paddock laughed, lighting a cigar. "Honey, you must be truly desperate." "He has a soul," Amelia lied, playing the part of the naive, religious do-gooder. "And he told me something." Paddock's boots dropped to the floor. "What?" "He said he wants to make peace with God, but he won't give up his, earthly treasures. To the law, he said he'd only tell a wife." Paddock's eyes narrowed. "Gold?" "He didn't say. He just said legacy." Amelia twisted her hands. "Sheriff, if he hangs on Monday, the secret dies with him. If I marry him, I can find out. I can be persuasive." Paddock studied her. He saw a weak, foolish city girl. He figured he could let her marry the brute, wait for her to get the location, hang Ketchum, and then scare the widow into handing it over. It was cleaner than torture. "All right," Paddock grinned, standing up and grabbing his keys. "I love a romance. Let's get the parson. We'll have a midnight ceremony. Just you, me, and the monster." Amelia's heart hammered against her ribs. She had cleared the first hurdle, but as she followed the sheriff out into the night, she realized the terrifying truth of what she had just done. She wasn't just marrying a stranger. She was marrying a man who everyone said was a killer, and she had just lied to the most dangerous man in town to do it. As they approached the cage, the parson, a disheveled man dragged out of bed, mumbled a prayer. Aidan stood up inside the cage. He looked huge. He loomed over Amelia, the bars separating their faces by inches. "Do you?" the parson stammered. "Aidan Ketchum, take this woman." "I do," Aidan rumbled, his eyes locking onto Paddock over Amelia's shoulder. "And do you, Amelia Ann Miller?" Amelia looked up at Aidan. Up close, he smelled of sweat and pine needles. His hands, gripping the bars, were scarred and deadly. "I do," she whispered. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the parson rushed out. "You may... well, you can shake hands through the bars." Aidan reached through. His hand engulfed hers. His skin was rough, calloused and warm. He squeezed her hand. Once, hard. A signal. "Kiss the bride," Paddock jeered. Aidan pulled Amelia towards the bars. She gasped as her face met the cold iron. Aidan leaned in, his lips brushing her forehead through the gap. "Get to the wagon," he whispered against her skin, so low only she could hear. "When the shooting starts, don't look back." Amelia pulled away, her eyes wide. Paddock slapped his thigh. "All right, honeymoon's over. Back to the hotel, Mrs. Ketchum. You can visit your husband in the morning to get that information." Amelia stumbled back, her hand still burning where Aidan had touched her. She watched as Paddock taunted Aidan one last time and walked away, the keys jingling at his belt. She didn't go to the hotel. She hid in the alleyway, watching. Inside the cage, Aidan sat down. He waited until the footsteps faded. Then he retrieved the tiny silver knife from under his foot. It was too small to cut iron, too small to pick a lock. But the hinge on the floorboard, weakened by rust and rot. Aidan began to dig. He wasn't digging out. He was digging for the leverage he needed to snap the wood. He looked up at the moon. He was a married man now. "Sorry, Amelia," he muttered into the dark. "You didn't marry a widow's pension. You married a war." The town of Blackwood Creek did not sleep peacefully. It passed out. By 3 in the morning, the saloons had shuttered, the piano music had faded into the expansive silence of the plains, and the only light came from the waning moon and the dying embers of the lantern swinging on the corner of the cage. Amelia Ann Miller was crouched behind a stack of empty whiskey barrels in the alleyway, adjacent to the sheriff's office. Her legs were cramping, and the cold had seeped through the thin soles of her shoes, turning her toes into blocks of ice. Every instinct she had screamed at her to run, to take the chaotic energy of the wedding and flee into the darkness while the town was distracted. But she couldn't. She had tied her fate to the man in the cage. If he died, she was just a destitute widow who would be preyed upon by the morning. If he lived, well, she didn't know what would happen if he lived. She peeked around the barrel. Deputy Cletus was still slumped in the chair, his chin resting on his chest, a shotgun balanced precariously on his knees. Inside the cage, there was no movement. Amelia's heart sank. Had Aidan given up? Had the knife been too small? Inside the iron box, Aidan Ketchum was operating in a world of agonizing precision. The silver pocket knife Amelia had given him was useless for cutting iron, and too brittle to use as a pry bar for the lock. But Aidan knew wood. He knew that the oak planks of the wagon bed had been exposed to rain and rot for years. He had located the rusted hinge of the floorboard where the bolts had eaten into the wood. For 2 hours, he had been using the knife not to cut, but to scrape. He scraped away the soft, rotted pulp around the bolt, silently blowing the dust away. His fingers were raw and bleeding, the skin stripped away by the rough wood and the biting cold. But he didn't stop. Snap! The sound was dull, like a dry twig breaking underfoot. It wasn't loud, but in the silence of the night, it sounded like a gunshot to Aidan's ears. He froze. On the chair outside, Deputy Cletus snorted, shifted his weight, and smacked his lips. The shotgun slid an inch down his leg. Aidan held his breath, his massive lungs burning, waiting to see if the man would wake. Cletus scratched his nose and settled back into his stupor. Aidan exhaled slowly. He wedged his fingers into the gap he had created. The bolt was loose. With a grunt of exertion that made the veins in his neck bulge like cords of rope, Aidan pulled. He didn't pull up. He pulled in. The oak plank groaned, then gave way, splintering inward. A hole, barely 12 inches wide, opened up in the floor of the cage. Aidan looked at the shackles on his ankles. The chain was short, maybe 18 inches. It would be a tight fit. He dropped his legs through the hole first, the heavy iron chains clanking softly against the undercarriage of the wagon. He wiggled his hips through, the rough wood scraping his skin raw. He was hanging upside down now, suspended by his waist, the blood rushing to his head. He could see the mud below him. He placed his hands on the muddy ground and pulled the rest of his torso through. He was out. But he wasn't free. The chains on his wrists and ankles were heavy, and he was weak from 3 days of starvation. He crawled out from under the wagon, the mud coating him like a second skin, turning him into a shadow. He stood up slowly. He was 5 feet away from the deputy. Aidan looked at the keys hanging from Cletus's belt. He needed them. If he ran now, the clanking of his chains would wake every dog in town. He needed to be silent. He took a step. Clink! The chain between his ankles hit a rock. Cletus's eyes snapped open. For a second, the deputy looked confused, staring at the empty cage. Then, he looked down and saw the mud-covered giant standing over him. Cletus opened his mouth to scream, his hand scrabbling for the shotgun. Aidan didn't hesitate. He couldn't afford to. He swung his bound wrists like a sledgehammer. The heavy iron manacles connected with the side of Cletus's head with a sickening crunch. The deputy's eyes rolled back, and he slumped sideways out of the chair, landing in the mud with a wet thud. Aidan fell to his knees, gasping for air. The effort had nearly blacked him out. He fumbled for the keys on the unconscious man's belt. His large, trembling fingers struggled with the leather loop. "Let me." The whisper came from the darkness. Aidan flinched, his body tensing to strike again, but he stopped when he saw Amelia emerge from the alley. She looked like a ghost in her grey dress, her face pale, her eyes wide with terror. She didn't look at the deputy's bleeding head. She looked at the keys. "Hurry!" Aidan rasped, holding his wrists out. Amelia's hands shook, but her fingers were nimble. She snatched the key ring. There were 4 keys. She tried the first one. It jammed. "Wrong one," Aidan hissed. "The small brass one." She found it. She slid it into the lock on his left wrist. Click. The manacle fell open. She did the right. Then she knelt in the mud, ruining her dress completely, and unlocked his ankles. As the chains fell away, Aidan stood up to his full height. He stretched, his joints popping. He looked at the mountains looming in the distance. Then he looked down at the small woman shivering in the mud. "You stayed," he said, his voice thick with disbelief. "I have nowhere else to go," Amelia replied, her voice trembling. "And neither do you." "I got a cabin," Aidan said, "but it's 20 miles of hard country, and Paddock will be on us by sunrise." He bent down and picked up the deputy's shotgun. He checked the breech, loaded. He stripped the gun belt off the unconscious man and strapped it around his own waist. It was too small, so he slung it over his shoulder. "Can you ride?" Aidan asked. I've ridden a carriage horse." "That ain't riding," Aidan grunted. He walked over to the hitching post where the deputy's horse, a roan gelding, was tied. It wasn't enough for 2. He looked at the livery stable across the street. Locked. "We take the wagon horses," Aidan decided. He moved to the front of the cage wagon. The team of 4 draft horses had been unhitched, but were corralled in a makeshift pen nearby. They were heavy, slow brutes, not made for speed, but they were strong. Aidan grabbed a halter and vaulted onto the bare back of a massive black Percheron. He reached down, extending a hand to Amelia. "Take my hand, Mrs. Ketchum," he said, the ghost of a smile touching his lips for the first time. "Unless you want to stay here and explain Cletus's headache to the sheriff." Amelia looked at the massive hand, then back at the town. She reached up. Aidan hoisted her effortlessly, placing her in front of him on the horse's broad wither. "Hold on to the mane," he ordered, "and don't scream." He kicked the horse's ribs. The massive beast surged forward, not with a gallop, but with a ground-shaking trot that rattled Amelia's teeth. They thundered out of the town square, past the hotel where Sheriff Paddock slept, and plunged into the darkness of the tree line. Behind them, a single shout rang out, followed by the frantic ringing of the church bell. The hunt was on. The darkness of the forest was absolute. The canopy of ancient ponderosa pines blocked out the moon, leaving them to navigate by the sound of the rushing creek and Aidan's memory. They had been riding for 2 hours. The draft horse, whom Aidan had gruffly named Tank, midway up the first ridge, was heaving, his sides slick with sweat. The beast was built for pulling ploughs, not carrying double weight up a 40-degree incline. "We have to stop," Amelia gasped. She was clinging to the horse's mane so tightly her fingers had locked into claws. Her legs were chafed raw by the rough horsehair and the awkward seating position. Every muscle in her body screamed in protest. "Can't stop," Aidan said, his voice rumbling against her back. "They'll have trackers. Dogs." "The horse will die," Amelia countered, finding a spark of defiance despite her exhaustion. "And then we'll be walking." Aidan pulled back on the halter, and the horse came to a shuddering halt. The silence of the forest rushed in to fill the void, heavy and oppressive. The air here was thinner, sharper. It smelled of pine resin and damp earth. Aidan slid off the horse, landing silently on the pine needles. He reached up and grabbed Amelia by the waist, lifting her down. Her legs buckled the moment her feet touched the ground, and she collapsed against his chest. For a moment he held her. It wasn't an embrace of affection, but of necessity. She felt the heat radiating off him, the solid wall of muscle that was his chest. He felt the trembling of her bird-like frame. "You're soft," Aidan muttered, stepping back and steadying her against a tree. "City soft." "I am alive," Amelia snapped back, pushing her hair out of her face, "which is more than you would be if I hadn't walked up to that cage." Aidan paused. He looked at her, really looked at her, in the gloom. "Why did you?" "The truth, Amelia. No stories about gold or widows' pensions. Why does a woman like you marry a dead man?" Amelia wrapped her shawl tighter around herself. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a cold, hollow ache. "My husband, my first husband, was a gambler," she began, her voice quiet. "Thomas, he was charming and handsome, and he lost everything we had. When he died of consumption 6 months ago, I thought the slate was wiped clean. It wasn't." She looked down at her muddy hands. "He owed money to the O'Malley gang in Philadelphia. They said the debt passed to the spouse. They gave me a month to pay $2,000. I sold everything. It wasn't enough. They came to my boarding house. They threatened to take the payment in trade." Aidan listened, his face impassive, but his jaw tightened. "I ran," she continued. "I answered Tobias Finch's ad because Montana is the ends of the earth. I thought I'd be safe. When Finch died, I knew I had to disappear again. If I'm Mrs. Aidan Ketchum, living on a remote mountain claim, the O'Malleys won't find me. Or if they do," she looked up at him, "I figured the bear of Bitterroot might scare them off." Aidan let out a short, harsh laugh. He walked over to the creek and splashed icy water on his face, washing away the prison grime. "So I'm your scarecrow," he said, wiping his beard. "You traded one monster for another." "Are you?" Amelia asked. "A monster?" Aidan turned to face the woods. "Paddock thinks so. He framed me, Amelia. I didn't kill those prospectors. Paddock sent men to my land to drive me off. They started shooting. I shot back. I wounded 2 of them, but I didn't kill them. When the sheriff rode up, he had 3 bodies in his wagon, strangers I'd never seen, and claimed I'd butchered them. He planted their watches in my floorboards." "Why?" "Because of the timber," Aidan said, looking up at the towering trees. "Blackwood Creek is growing. The railroad is coming through next spring. They need ties. My land sits on the best stand of timber in the valley. Paddock has a contract with the railroad. He needs my trees, but I wouldn't sell. So he decided to hang me and take the deed." The gravity of their situation settled over Amelia. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was a conspiracy involving the law itself. "He won't stop coming," Amelia whispered. "No," Aidan agreed. He checked the shotgun again. "He won't. Paddock can't let me live. If I testify to a federal judge, he hangs." Aidan walked back to the horse. "We need to keep moving. But we can't take the trail. Paddock knows I'll head for the cabin. He'll have men waiting there." "Then where do we go?" Aidan pointed up, toward the jagged peaks that pierced the star-filled sky. The peaks were covered in snow, glowing ghostly white. "The Devil's Spine," Aidan said. "It's a ridge that runs behind my land. It's steep, rocky, and full of blind drops. Horses can't make it. But men, and a determined woman, might. You want to climb that?" Amelia looked at the mountain with horror. "We ain't got a choice. We have to lose the horses to lose the tracks. We send the horse down the valley trail to lead them away. We go up." Aidan slapped the flank of the draft horse. "Go on, Tank. Go home." The horse, happy to be unburdened, trotted off down the well-worn path, leaving a clear trail of hoofprints in the soft earth. Aidan turned to Amelia. He saw the doubt in her eyes. He saw the fatigue. He walked over to her and knelt down, bringing his face level with hers. For a man of such size, his movement was surprisingly gentle. "I can't carry you," he said seriously. "I can help you. I can pull you up the ledges. But you have to climb. If you stop, we die. If you scream, we die. Can you do this?" Amelia looked at the mountain. It looked like a tombstone. Then she thought of the cage. She thought of the men in Philadelphia. She looked at Aidan, the scars on his chest, the fierce intelligence in his eyes. She reached down and tore the lace hem off her dress, ripping the skirt until it hung just above her ankles. She took off her shawl and tied it around her waist like a belt. "Lead the way, husband," she said. Aidan grinned. It was a wild, dangerous grin that made him look less like a man and more like the wolf people claimed he was. "Stay close," he commanded. They began the ascent. The first hour was brutal. The terrain wasn't just steep. It was a vertical obstacle course of scree and boulders. Amelia slipped constantly, her smooth-soled shoes finding no purchase on the loose rock. Every time she fell, Aidan was there, his hand clamping onto her arm like a vice, hauling her upright. He didn't offer sympathy. He offered instruction. Step there, not there. Grab the root, not the branch. By the time the sun began to bleed grey light over the horizon, they had reached the timberline. The air was freezing. Amelia's lungs felt like they were filled with broken glass. They stopped on a narrow ledge overlooking the valley. Far below, in the grey mist of dawn, Amelia saw tiny specks moving along the valley floor. "Look," Aidan pointed. Amelia squinted. She saw the horse, Tank, grazing in a meadow miles away, and behind him, emerging from the trees, were riders, 5 of them. "They found the horse," Aidan noted. "They'll see the tracks end. It'll confuse them for an hour, maybe 2. That's all the lead we have." He turned to continue climbing, but Amelia gasped, clutching her side. She sank to her knees, her face ashen. I can't," she wheezed. Aidan looked at her. She was done. Her body had hit its limit. He looked up at the ridge. There was a cave up there, a hunter's blind he used in the winter. It was safe. But it was another 1,000 feet up. He crouched down. "Put your arms around my neck. You said you wouldn't carry me," she whispered. "I lied," Aidan grunted. "I'm a criminal, remember?" He scooped her up. She was lighter than a sack of feed, but the awkwardness of the weight threw off his balance. He groaned as his bruised ribs protested. Amelia buried her face in his neck, smelling the sweat and the pine. Aidan began to climb again, carrying his bride up the face of the mountain. He focused on the rhythm of his boots on the rock. 1 step, survive. 2 steps, revenge. He didn't know it yet, but the weight in his arms was the only thing keeping him from turning around and going down there to kill them all. She was his anchor, and for the first time in 10 years, Aidan Ketchum was afraid of dying. Not because he valued his life, but because he didn't want to leave her alone on this mountain. As they crested the ridge, a gunshot echoed from the valley floor. The sound rolled up the canyon walls like thunder. Aidan didn't flinch. He just tightened his grip on Amelia and stepped into the shadow of the caves. "Welcome home, Mrs. Ketchum," he whispered into the dark. "Now the real fight begins." The cave was less a home and more a scar in the mountainside. It was a shallow recess behind a curtain of scrub brush, the floor littered with dry pine needles and the bones of small animals. It smelled of earth and old winters. Aidan set Amelia down on a flat rock near the back wall. She didn't move immediately. Her body was locked in a tremor that had nothing to do with the freezing altitude and everything to do with the shock of the last 4 hours. Aidan collapsed opposite her. The adrenaline that had fueled his climb was evaporating, leaving behind a crushing weight of exhaustion. He leaned his head back against the stone, his eyes closing. His wrists, raw from the manacles and the climb, were weeping blood into the dirt. For a long time, the only sound was the wind whistling past the cave mouth and the ragged breathing of 2 people who had cheated death. "Are they coming?" Amelia asked. Her voice was small, brittle. Aidan cracked one eye open. "Not up the face. Not with horses. They'll have to take the switchback trail around the North Ridge. Takes 6 hours. We got time. Time to what? To bleed. To rest. Then to run." Amelia looked at him. In the grey morning light filtering through the brush, he looked terrifying. The mud on his face had dried into a cracked mask. His beard was matted, and the welts on his chest from the jailer's whips were angry and purple. But she didn't look away. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the handkerchief she had saved. It was tiny, embroidered with violets, a ridiculous thing to have in a cave. She crawled across the small space between them. Aidan flinched as she approached, his muscles coiling instinctively. "Stop," he growled. "Give me your hands," she ordered. Her voice wasn't steady, but it was firm. Aidan hesitated, then slowly extended his wrists. Amelia used the last of her canteen water to dampen the cloth. She began to dab at the raw ring of flesh where the iron had bitten down. The contact was electric. Aidan hissed through his teeth, but he didn't pull away. "You have gentle hands," Aidan murmured, watching her work. "Too gentle for this place. This mountain eats soft things, Amelia." "I told you," she said, scrubbing at a particularly deep cut. "I'm not as soft as I look. Soft things don't marry men in cages." "No," Aidan agreed. "Desperate things do. Crazy things do." He caught her hand, stopping her. His thumb brushed over her knuckles, rough skin against smooth. The cave seemed to shrink, the air growing suddenly heavy. "You saved my life," Aidan said, his voice dropping to a low rumble. "But you didn't save yourself. You just tied yourself to a sinking stone. Paddock won't stop. He can't. If I live, he hangs. It's him or me." "Then let it be him," Amelia whispered. Aidan searched her eyes. He was looking for the fear he was used to seeing in people's eyes when they looked at him. The bear of Bitterroot. The monster. He didn't see it. He saw a fierce, terrified determination. "Why didn't you run?" he asked. "Back in town, when I broke out. You could have slipped away." "I have a debt," Amelia said, pulling her hand back to rinse the cloth. "In Philadelphia, $2,000, to men who break fingers for interest. If I go back, I'm dead. If I stay here alone, I'm dead. You're the only bad bet I have left that might pay out." Aidan chuckled, a dry, rusty sound. "So it is a business transaction. Isn't that what marriage is?" "Maybe in the city," Aidan said. He leaned forward, the intensity in his eyes making Amelia catch her breath. "Out here, marriage is about who watches the door while you sleep. It's about who keeps the fire lit when the blizzard hits. It ain't a contract, Amelia. It's a pact of blood." He reached out and touched a stray lock of hair that had fallen across her face. "If we do this, if we fight Paddock, there's no going back. You pull a trigger, you change, you kill a man, you carry him forever. I can learn, she said. I know, Aidan said sadly. That's what I'm afraid of. He shifted, groaning as his stomach cramped. He hadn't eaten in 4 days. My cabin, he said, shifting to survival mode. It's 3 miles down the backside of this ridge. I got supplies cached under the floorboards. Rifles, powder, dried venison. If we can get there, we can stand a siege. And if Paddock is already there, then we take it back. Aidan's face hardened into stone. It's my land, my home. I ain't letting that snake have it. He tried to stand, but his legs gave way. He stumbled, hitting the wall. Amelia was there instantly, her shoulder under his arm, straining to support his massive weight. Easy, she said. You're starving. I'm fine, he lied through gritted teeth. You're a fool, she corrected him. Rest. We move at dusk. The shadows will hide us. Aidan looked down at her. She was barely 5 feet tall, weighing 100 pounds soaking wet, yet she was holding him up. A strange warmth bloomed in his chest, something he hadn't felt since before the war, since before he retreated to the mountains to forget humanity. All right, Mrs. Ketchum, he whispered, sliding back down to the floor. We move at dusk. He fell asleep almost instantly. Amelia didn't sleep. She sat at the mouth of the cave, the shotgun across her lap, watching the tree line. She watched the sun track across the sky, turning the snow-capped peaks from gold to blinding white to blood red. She was cold. She was hungry. She was a widow of a gambler and the wife of a fugitive. But as she watched the hawk circle above the valley, she realized something strange. For the first time in years, she didn't feel helpless. She felt like she was finally holding the cards. The descent was harder than the climb. Darkness had fallen again, turning the forest into a labyrinth of shadows and snapping twigs. Aidan moved with the eerie silence of a predator, his feet finding purchase where there seemed to be none. Amelia followed, stepping exactly where he stepped, learning the rhythm of the stalk. They smelled the cabin before they saw it. It wasn't the smell of wood smoke. That would have been welcoming. It was the smell of tobacco and unwashed bodies. Aidan signaled for a halt. They crouched behind a fallen Douglas fir, peering through the undergrowth. The cabin sat in a small clearing, bordered by a rushing creek. It was a sturdy structure, built of hand-hewn logs with a low porch. Lantern light spilled from the windows, casting long, distorted shadows on the snow. 2 horses were tethered at the rail. Not 5. Just 2. 2 inside, Aidan whispered, his ear turned towards the wind. Maybe a 3rd watching the back. Is Paddock there? Amelia whispered. No. Paddock leads from the rear. These are hired guns. Probably the ones who tracked the horse. Aidan checked the shotgun. He had 2 shells, that was it. He looked at Amelia. Stay here. No. Aidan glared at her. This ain't a debate. I'm going down there to clear the house. It's going to get ugly. And if there's a 3rd man, Amelia hissed, if he comes up behind you, you have no eyes in the back of your head, Aidan. Aidan paused. She was right. He was weak, and his reflexes were dulled by hunger. Can you shoot? He asked, looking at the heavy revolver tucked into his belt, the one he'd taken from Deputy Cletus. I've shot a rabbit once. Men are bigger targets, Aidan said grimly. He handed her the revolver. It was heavy in her hand, the steel cold and unforgiving. You circle to the creek. Watch the back door. If anyone comes out who isn't me, you pull the hammer back, you aim for the chest, and you squeeze. Don't hesitate. You hesitate, you die. Amelia nodded, her mouth dry. She took the gun. Aidan vanished into the dark. Amelia crept towards the creek, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The water masked the sound of her footsteps. She positioned herself behind the woodshed, having a clear view of the rear door. She waited. Inside the cabin, she heard the murmur of voices. A laugh, the clink of a bottle. Then the front door exploded inward. The sound was deafening. Aidan had kicked the heavy oak door off its hinges. A shout of surprise was cut short by the boom of the shotgun. Blam! Glass shattered. A man screamed. Douse the light! Someone yelled. Another gunshot, this one sharper, a pistol retort. Then the back door flew open. A man stumbled out, clutching a rifle. He was young, with a scraggly beard, panicked. He wasn't looking for a fight. He was looking to flank Aidan. He raised his rifle, aiming toward the front of the house where Aidan would be entering. Amelia stepped out from behind the shed. "Drop it!" she screamed. The man spun around, eyes wide. He saw a woman, a small, frail woman in a torn grey dress, holding a cannon of a revolver with both hands. He blinked, then he sneered. "Go home, little girl," he spat, swinging the rifle barrel toward her. Amelia didn't think. She didn't weigh the moral consequences. She remembered the cage. She remembered the debt. She remembered Aidan's voice. "You hesitate, you die." She pulled the trigger. The recoil nearly broke her wrist. The gun bucked up, the flash blinding her in the dark. The bullet didn't hit his chest, it hit his thigh. The man shrieked, his leg buckling under him. He hit the ground, the rifle flying from his hands. He scrambled in the dirt, reaching for his boot knife. Amelia cocked the hammer again, her hands shaking so hard the gun rattled. "I said stay down!" The man froze. He looked at the barrel, then at her eyes. He saw the panic, but he also saw the willingness to fire again. He raised his hands. Silence fell over the cabin. "Amelia!" Aidan's voice boomed from inside. It was laced with panic. "I'm here!" she yelled, her voice cracking. I got one!" Aidan limped out the back door. He was bleeding from a graze on his shoulder, and he was holding a bloody knife, but he was alive. He looked at the man on the ground, then at Amelia. He walked over, kicked the knife away from the wounded man, and grabbed Amelia by the shoulders. He checked her for wounds, his eyes frantic. "You okay?" "I shot him," she whispered, staring at the man groaning in the dirt. "I shot a man." "You defended yourself," Aidan said firmly. "You did good. You did real good." He turned to the wounded man. It was a hired tracker named Beckett. Aidan knew him, a lowlife who would kill his own mother for a bottle of whiskey. Aidan grabbed Beckett by the collar and hauled him up against the woodshed. "Where's Paddock?" Aidan growled. Beckett spat blood. "Go to hell, Ketchum." Aidan pressed his thumb into the bullet wound in Beckett's leg. The man screamed, a high, thin sound that cut through the night. "Where?" He's at the telegraph office," Beckett gasped. "He's waiting for a reply." "Reply from who?" "From back east," Beckett sobbed. "He sent a wire to Philadelphia, to a fella named O'Malley. Asked about a runaway woman named Miller." The world stopped for Amelia. The gun slipped from her fingers and landed in the snow. Aidan stiffened. He looked back at Amelia. The secret was out. Paddock wasn't just hunting a murderer anymore. He was brokering a deal. He was going to sell Amelia back to the gang, to cover his own tracks. "He knows," Amelia whispered. "He knows who I am." "He knows you're worth money," Aidan corrected, his voice turning deadly calm. "Which means he won't just send a posse next time. He'll bring an army." Aidan knocked Beckett out with a swift blow to the temple. He let the man slide to the ground. "Get inside," Aidan commanded, grabbing Amelia's arm. "We grab the ammo, the food, and the blankets. We can't stay here." "Where can we go?" Amelia cried. "They know everything." Aidan stopped at the door of his home, a home that had been violated, a sanctuary that was no longer safe. He looked at his wife, standing in the snow, a killer, now just like him. "We stop running," Aidan said. "Paddock wants a war. He wants to bring the city to my mountain. Fine." He walked inside and pried up the floorboard near the hearth. Beneath it lay a wooden crate marked Confederate States Army. He pried the lid open. Inside sat a repeating Henry rifle and box after box of ammunition. "We aren't going to hide, Amelia," Aidan said, racking the lever of the rifle. "We're going to hunt." The sun didn't rise over Blackwood Creek that morning. The storm did. A wall of grey sleet battered the town, turning the main street into a river of churning mud. It was the kind of weather that kept honest folks indoors, but Sheriff Josiah Paddock was not an honest man. He stood in the doorway of the telegraph office, a glass of whiskey in one hand and a freshly printed telegram in the other. It was the confirmation from Philadelphia. The O'Malley gang was sending a collection team. Paddock grinned. He would hang Ketchum for the timber and sell the girl for the bounty. It was the perfect retirement plan. "Sheriff!" The shout came from the end of the street. Paddock squinted through the rain. A lone figure stood in the center of the thoroughfare, wrapped in a bear hide coat, a Henry rifle resting easily in the crook of his arm. It was Aidan Ketchum. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't running. He was waiting. Paddock dropped his glass. It shattered on the boardwalk. "Deputies! To me! He's here!" 3 men scrambled out of the jailhouse, rifles raised. But before they could level their weapons, a shot rang out. Not from Aidan, but from the roof of the livery stable. A bullet kicked up the dirt inches from the lead deputy's boot. "Next one goes in your knee!" Amelia's voice rang out, sharp and clear over the wind. She was prone on the roof, the heavy buffalo gun Aidan had given her, braced against the wood. The deputies froze. They looked at the giant in the street, then at the unseen sniper on the roof. They knew the legend of the bear. They didn't get paid enough to die for Paddock's timber deals. One by one, they lowered their rifles and backed away. "You cowards!" Paddock screamed, his face turning purple. He ripped his revolver from its holster, aiming it at Aidan. "I am the law. You're a thief, Josiah," Aidan said, his voice carrying through the rain like rolling thunder. He took a step forward. "And you're done." Paddock sneered, holding up the telegram. "You think you've won? I know who she is. I have the O'Malleys on the wire. If I die, the location goes out. She'll never be safe." Aidan didn't stop walking. "She stopped running yesterday." Paddock panicked. He swung his gun toward the livery roof, aiming blindly for Amelia. Crack! Aidan fired from the hip. The bullet didn't kill Paddock. It shattered his right shoulder. The sheriff screamed, dropping his gun and the telegram into the mud. He fell to his knees, clutching his ruined arm. Aidan walked up to him. He looked like judgment carved from granite. He picked up the soggy telegram, the only link to Amelia's past, and crumpled it in his massive fist. He looked at the townspeople peering fearfully from their windows. "He planted the watches!" Aidan roared, throwing the stolen pocket watches he'd retrieved from Paddock's safe onto the boardwalk. "He killed those prospectors for my land. Look at the dates on the inscriptions. 2 of them are dated after I was already in his cage." The truth hit the crowd like a physical blow. The town baker stepped out, picking up a watch. He looked at Paddock with disgust. Aidan didn't kill the sheriff. He didn't have to. He looked up at the roof, where Amelia was climbing down. She ran to him, heedless of the mud, and he caught her with his good arm, pulling her against his chest. "Let's go home, Mrs. Ketchum," Aidan whispered into her hair. "Yes," Amelia replied, burying her face in his coat. "Let's go home." They walked out of town, leaving the lawman broken in the mud. They rode back up the mountain, not as a mail-order bride and a monster, but as the king and queen of the Bitterroot. And though the winter was cold, the fire in the cabin never went out again. And that, my friends, is how a desperate widow and a condemned mountain man took on the whole world and won. Amelia Ann Miller didn't just save Aidan Ketchum's life that day. She saved his soul, and in return, the Bear of Bitterroot gave her the one thing she could never buy in the city: safety. History tells us that Aidan and Amelia Ketchum lived on that ridge for 40 years. They never found gold, but they raised 3 sons and built a life that no lawman and no loan shark could ever touch. Sometimes the scariest monsters aren't the ones in the cages. They're the ones holding the keys. And sometimes love isn't about soft words and flowers. It's about handing someone a loaded rifle and telling them you won't back down. What did you think of Aidan and Amelia's bargain? Would you have the courage to walk up to that cage? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this gritty tale of romance and revenge, please smash that like button. Share this video with a friend who loves a good western, and subscribe to the channel. Turn on that notification bell so you never miss a story from the frontier. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you on the next trail.